Welcome to the deep dive. So today we're taking on a really fundamental disconnect, one that I think shapes how our major institutions, healthcare, education, human services,
Yeah.
how they interact with complex real-world lives. We're looking at the tension between those simple flowcharts we love to draw and the sprawling truth of why people thrive or suffer.
And we're really pulling apart this structural conflict. Our mission is to unpack how these systems are built on what our sources call the myth of linear causality.
That one cause, one effect idea.
Exactly, the neat and tidy story. And we're looking at what happens when those systems collide with lives that are messy and nonlinear, especially the lives of autistic and neurodivergent people.
Our sources today create this just a spectacular friction. On one hand, we've got excerpts from Schramm's 2019 Introduction to Human Services.
Which treats complexity almost like a nuisance.
Right. And on the other, a really hard-hitting 2025 article by Silva, Abramov, and Quintanilha called Are We Truly Fighting Ableism? Digressions for a Complex Society.
And when you put them side by side, you start to see that the simplistic thinking in the first text isn't just, poor teaching. It's actually the foundation for the systemic harm that's described in the second.
So the big question we're exploring is a heavy one. What happens when institutions designed for simplicity encounter lives that just refuse to be simple? Let's jump right in with how complexity is taught. Or maybe how it's dismissed.
So in the foundational training for human services, the courses for future caseworkers, counselors, multicausality it's acknowledged. They don't ignore it.
Right, they have to mention it.
But it's how they frame it. The Schramm textbook calls it, and I'm quoting here, an instructional hazard.
Instructional hazard. Wow. That term alone just tells you everything, doesn't it?
It really does.
It suggests that the complexity of a human life is something that gets in the way of the lesson plan.
Precisely. It's an inconvenience for the professional, not the essential condition of the person seeking help. The book admits, human problems stem from many sources, so there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Well,
but instead of starting there, the text says the worker's main job is to disentangle the threads.
like it's a plate of spaghetti, and your job is to find the one single noodle that caused the whole mess.
Yes. It's a logistical problem, not a fundamental reality. It's all about getting back to that clean flowchart. Is the problem biological, psychological, or social? You have to tick one box.
So all those overlapping forces, oppression, trauma, economic stress, they just get reduced to separate threads to be pulled apart.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's hold that up against the lived reality of communities who live at the intersection of all those threads: autistic people, disabled people, queer and trans communities. For them, that knot isn't a problem to be untangled. It is their life. It's the ecology they inhabit.
And that's the core cognitive friction, right? For a neurotypical privileged person, maybe complexity is a temporary crisis. But for marginalized people, it's the ground they walk on, shaped by sensory demands, systemic exclusions, all of it.
And here's the insight for you, the listener, and it's a chilling one. When institutions insist on simplicity, on squeezing your reality onto their neat, single-cause form, it's always the lives at the margins that get cut away.
The system protects the clean narrative over the complicated truth. It creates this foundational lie that life is linear.
And to keep that lie going, you have to redefine who is fit to be served. Which brings us very powerfully to the De Silva, Abramov, and Quintanilha paper.
Yeah, this article is a total refusal of that soft approach. They are not interested in framing ableism as just, some bad attitudes or misunderstandings.
They see it as a structural, complex system.
They argue that we're fundamentally getting it wrong. Ableism isn't a glitch in the system. It's an engine of modern society.
Right.
A recursive system woven through history, economics, and culture.
Okay, hold on. Recursive. For anyone listening who's trying to grasp that, what's a good way to think about it?
Think of a feedback loop, or maybe compounding interest. Ableism creates a condition, say, a building with no wheelchair access. That lack of access reinforces an assumption that people in wheelchairs don't go there.
Which then justifies not adding a ramp.
Exactly. It's constantly regenerating the very problem it claims to be managing.
And the authors actually map how this engine was built, piece by piece, over centuries.
They trace this devastating lineage. It starts with classical Greek ideals of bodily perfection, where your physical capacity was literally tied to your civic worth.
So right from the start, impairment is framed as a moral failing, not just a biological fact.
Yes. Then you move into medieval theology, and impairment is often seen as a sign of sin or divine punishment. It became dangerous just to be disabled.
And then comes the Enlightenment, which you'd think would fix things with reason, but it just categorized the problem.
It solidified it through science. This is where you get the classification schemes, the taxonomies of defect. Variation wasn't just a moral failing anymore. It was a biological deviation from the norm that needed to be managed.
But the final, crushing layer, according to the article, is industrial capitalism.
Absolutely crucial. Capitalism demanded a standardized, interchangeable worker who could perform on a linear clock. If your body or mind couldn't do that,
If you had sensory needs or needed a different pace,
you were defined as economically unfit, a cost, a burden. Each era just built a new justification for sorting people.
what's so unsettling is the conclusion they draw from this. They state that disability isn't a neutral descriptor. They call it an administrative invention.
That phrase is a wrecking ball. They're arguing that the category of disability wasn't created to describe people neutrally. It was invented to protect social and economic hierarchies by defining some bodies as burdens.
So the ableism they describe is constitutive. It actually produces the conditions, the poverty, the exclusion that it then claims it's just responding to.
Right. And connecting this to complexity science, the authors argued that diversity, cognitive, sensory, you name it, isn't just statistical noise. It's a stabilizing force in any healthy system.
That feels so counterintuitive. We're always taught that complexity and diversity equal risk.
They flip that completely. They say societies don't fail because they're too diverse. They fail because they insist on rigid homogeneity. And that recursive loop we talked about is how ableism maintains itself.
Exclusion leads to underrepresentation.
Which leads to epistemic erasure, where a whole way of being is just scrubbed from public knowledge, which of course leads to more exclusion. The system just keeps reinforcing itself.
Okay, this context is absolutely essential. So now let's bring it back and connect the two sources. The textbook's insistence on one simple cause and one simple effect. It's not just a clumsy teaching tool anymore.
No. It's how this entire structural system of ableism maintains control, and more importantly, how it shifts all the responsibility onto the individual.
Monocausality is the system's operating language.
It's what lets an institution take a messy, historical, relational reality and flatten it until it fits on an intake form. They have to find one bullet point they can address.
And this linear lens is just devastating when you apply it to neurodivergent experiences. The article specifically talks about gestalt language processors, or GLPs. Maybe we should quickly clarify what that means.
Sure. So most people are analytic language processors. They learn language bit by bit, word, then phrase, then sentence. GLPs, common in autistic people, learn differently. They often start with big chunks, entire phrases or scripts they've heard, which are called gestalts, and only later do they break them down.
Right, so it's a nonlinear, atmospheric way of acquiring language.
Yeah.
And the linear monocausal system just can't compute that.
It sees it as a delay or a failure. A GLP might use a whole sentence perfectly, but if it's not in the exact context the analytic model expects, it gets labeled as perseveration or defiance.
Even though it's actually a sign of high-level pattern recognition.
Exactly. The system only values the one linear path. The article gives other common examples too.
Like sensory overload. A meltdown is this complex ecological event sensory input, social friction, anxiety, all crashing together.
But the linear framework collapses it all into one thing: non-compliance, or bad behavior.
A shutdown, too. It's often a biological protective mechanism, a way to keep the nervous system from collapsing.
And it gets reduced to defiance,
Yeah.
or a lack of motivation. Even something that's a huge autistic strength, like deep pattern recognition, gets pathologized as rigidity because it doesn't fit the institution's simple plan.
I think this is where we have to pause on the weight of their critique. This reductionism, this simplification. It's not just an error. They argue it's a deliberate governance strategy.
It's the ultimate tool for deflecting responsibility. If you can collapse a person's entire context, their sensory world, their economic reality, their history, into one single personal deficit like poor motivation, then the system is off the hook.
If the problem is just your flaw, the system doesn't have to change the fluorescent lighting or the rigid schedules or the historical biases baked into its policies.
It creates what the sources call an epistemic firewall. The textbook sees multicausality as a pedagogical hurdle. The research article sees it as an epistemic battleground.
And linear causation is revealed as a political instrument. It turns huge structural problems into small, manageable, and blameworthy personal failures.
It keeps the system clean and the person responsible.
Okay, so if we accept this framework, that ableism is built on this rigid linear thinking, what does liberation or even just effective care start to look like?
It demands a total shift. a move from what the authors call analytic thinking to ecological thinking. We have to stop hunting for the single cause inside the person and start mapping the entire system of forces acting on them.
So less what's wrong with you and more, what is this environment doing to you?
Exactly. It means we have to reject those binary categories, able, disabled, normal, abnormal, and move to a relational understanding of capacity. Capacity isn't a fixed trait, it changes with the environment.
The focus shifts entirely. Disablement isn't something a person has. It's something a society does.
That's the core idea, and it means the job of the human service worker is no longer to untangle the threads of the person. Their job is to map the system of power, economics, and sensory forces that are boxing that person in.
Ecological thinking honors the fact that truth is relational and historical. It sees complexity not as an error to be fixed, but as the actual texture of the world.
It's not chaos.
No. I love how the source material puts it. It says complexity isn't chaos, it's kinship. It's seeing that we're all shaped by rivers of influence, not solitary drops. A society that actually honors that complexity would be one where you don't have to compress your entire being just to be allowed to breathe inside its institutions.
And that recognition is fundamentally liberating. I mean, when you acknowledge the fullness of someone's context, their sensory world, their economic reality, you can no longer blame them for the injuries they carry. All these frameworks that honor complexity, whether it's complexity science or gestalt language processing, they all point to the same truth. Life and suffering are not linear. Our pain doesn't follow the neat rules of cause and effect.
We started with a textbook treating complexity like an inconvenience, and we ended up with this radical critique of structural ableism. It just shows that the world we're building really depends on the questions we're willing to ask.
And the complexity we're willing to hold, which requires systemic responsibility.
Indeed. And that leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to take away, one that builds directly on all this. The source material says institutions punish complexity because complexity demands responsibility. So if the failure of linear care is actually about infrastructural design, not personal failure, what specific structural responsibility in education and policy or in economics has to be prioritized and demanded first to start dismantling this whole monocausal machine? Something for you to mull over.